Pint of cider, about £2.50.
Who did Cheryl Cole marry?
A footballer.
And how about, what's the pheasant shooting season?
I don't know that either.
Very good. You see, you're not a toff after all.
How much is a pint of milk?
A pint of milk's about 45p.
I've got written 45p. Outstanding. Loaf of bread?
It depends what type of bread you like, doesn't it? I mean, the loaf of bread question is a very interesting one, because when Margaret Thatcher first became Prime Minister, the loaf of bread was a price set by the government.
Oh.
Now it's not. And so you can buy fancy bread, you can buy disgusting black bread if you like.
Right.
It'll probably cost you a fortune, or you can buy an ordinary loaf of bread and you can probably get one for 75p.
Okay, I've got just over £1, but that's, you know, that's near enough. And first class stamp?
Oh, it depends whether you use a franking machine or not. I think it's about 60p.
62 pence. My goodness me. I've absolutely, you know.
I'm quite surprised.
Mr. Rees Mogg says it's full of kindred spirits.
And I think if you go around Somerset, most people broadly speak the Queen's English.
Well, I haven't heard many of them speak like you.
Well, perhaps I've got more plums at the back of my throat, but if they had a few plums, they'd probably sound like me. I think this sort of modern word can be much abused and is often used to mean all things good. Look at this beautiful surroundings, which is old-fashioned, glorious English countryside. That's not modern, but it's great. And finally, as time is short, Mr. Deputy Speaker wants me to wind up, the financial transactions tax. This is the work of the devil. It must be opposed. We have a lot of wishy-washy stuff about how if we get global agreement, well, thank God for Lee Kuan Yew, because I think we can be confident that the good people of Singapore will say no to this awful nonsense. A financial transaction tax is not taxing invisible, non-existent people. It would fall on the citizens and subjects of the United Kingdom. We must oppose it, we must be robust in opposing it, and we must not let the European Union get their grubby little hands on it.
Yeah. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister recall the words of his noble predecessor, Baroness Thatcher, who said that advisers advise and ministers decide? Does not a judicious Prime Minister consider things thoughtfully and carefully before making up his mind? And would only a socialist yahoo make up his mind in 23 minutes? That it is very often how you say something rather than what you say that is important. So I was making a very important point about the judges of the European Court who had ruled that their own pay had to be increased against the general principle that a judge should never judge in his own cause. Very interestingly, when they had a similar case before them last year, they ruled in exactly the opposite way. They said that the political decision had to stand and that they couldn't rule. And I think that's very important. Using that word got a lot of publicity for what seemed to me a serious failing in the European judicial system. And rather gratifyingly, it's a failing that the judges themselves have put right. I can't claim that's cause and effect. I can't claim the European judges noticed what I'd said, but I'm pleased that they put it right. And it certainly did get quite a bit of publicity all around the world, word floxinoki nihilipilification. Yes. We see even this weekend that Tesco's are going to take on fewer part-time people because of a directive from Brussels. Are we really going to deny our citizens growth because Brussels wants to put a further yoke on them? And of course I'll give way.
Is the honourable gentleman aware that one of Tesco's most profitable parts is the part of Eastern Europe that is in the European Union?
Well, I'm glad to say that Tesco's, great company that it is also very popular in Thailand, whose application for the European Union I was currently unaware of. However, there was... Depends what you're offering. I would like my constituents to have cheap energy rather more than I would like them to have windmills.
So, well, global warming, for example, is that for you a serious issue, man-made climate change, or perhaps you don't accept that?
If you read the IPCC report on this, it said that if we were to take action now to try and stop man-made global warming, it would have no effect for hundreds or possibly 1,000 years. I'm all in favour of long-term policy making, but I think trying to forecast the climate for 1,000 years and what little steps you make now, having an ability to change it, is unrealistic. And I think the cost of it is probably unaffordable. I think you need to look at ameliorating the consequences of anything that may happen, like dredging rivers on the Somerset levels so that the floodwaters have a means to escape, doing that on a wider scale, looking at the Dutch experience over hundreds of years in making land that is below sea level, prosperous agricultural land. I think you want to take that approach rather than trying to go back to living in the Stone Age by reducing people's use of energy.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It is amazing, actually, how united the Conservative Party has been so far today. We had a Eurosceptic statement from the Prime Minister and then a Eurosceptic speech from the Foreign Secretary. So I think it can only be that it is the Liberal Democrats who are inveigling us down the path of unrighteousness to take us away from supporting this motion. And I think in the Foreign Secretary's speech he made 6 points which must have been written for him by the Liberal Democrats, because he's far too clever a man to have thought of them for himself, because they don't really add up. And I'm going to go through them. He made 2 points that were essentially trivial, too trivial for a man of the Foreign Secretary's standing. That was that there was no manifesto commitment for this referendum. Well, manifestos can only deal with what is known at the time. They can't deal with things that haven't yet arisen. And the crisis in the euro and the changes that could come from that were not at that point known with clarity. So it is right now to think beyond the manifesto and what the next steps are. So that point can be discarded. He then said we'd passed an Act of Parliament to deal with when we could have referendums. And so we did. But again, this House knows many things, but it is not omniscient. It cannot again take care of every occasion that may arise where a referendum may be a good idea, or every occasion when the British people, whom we should trust, may want one. So those 2 points go. The other 2 points that really don't add up to much were that a 3-way referendum is confusing. Well, that's not a problem, because this motion just calls for a bill to come forward in the next session, which can deal with any confusions. We can, in our wisdom, work out how to phrase a referendum, or a series of referendums if necessary, that will be understandable. And the 4th point he made that I thought, of course I'll give way.
Very grateful for the Honourable Member, and we always enjoy his speeches. But would the Honourable Member clear up one piece of confusion about the proposed 3-way referendum? Will it be, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by the alternative vote system, or will it be by first past the post? Because the motion isn't entirely clear.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member giving me an extra minute. It's a kind of Gloucestershire to give something to Somerset for once. But I would say that that can be dealt with in the legislation, and you could have 2 referendums, and as it happens, it may be more sense to have the second referendum after the renegotiation is completed. The 4th point that didn't work was that the EU was all or nothing, because it isn't all or nothing already. We've already got opt-outs and so forth. So there are 2 remaining points, those of you who are good mathematicians will have worked out, that we need to look at. One was that we're dealing with this in a crisis, and therefore it is the wrong time. When a man's house is burning down, you send in the fire brigade. Quite right. But then, when he wants to hire your house that is nearby to find fresh accommodation, you can set the terms of the tenancy. And that is the position we are in, a very strong negotiating position with the European Union, which we should maximise. And we should also note that with the financial crisis, we cannot solve our financial crisis until we have freed ourselves from the yoke of European regulation,